After my husband passed away, we gathered for the inheritance reading. My daughter-in-law sneered, "Finally, I'll live off his fortune." Everyone laughed. I straightened my blazer, pulled an envelope from my purse, and whispered, "Read it out loud." Minutes later, my lawyer chuckled quietly, while my daughter-in-law turned as pale as a ghost. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I adjusted my black blazer one more time as I sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room, the scent of leather and old books filling my nostrils. 2 weeks had passed since William's funeral, and here I was, surrounded by people who had barely acknowledged my existence during his final years. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter-in-law, Nola, sat across from me, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the polished table. At 38, she had the kind of calculated beauty that came from expensive treatments and a complete lack of genuine warmth. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and she wore a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But it was her eyes that bothered me most, cold blue stones that never quite looked at you, but rather through you, as if calculating your worth. My son Blaine sat beside her, his shoulders slumped in a way that made him look older than his 42 years. He'd inherited his father's kind eyes, but they seemed dimmed now, constantly seeking Nola's approval before he spoke or even moved. It broke my heart to see what he'd become under her influence. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat and began shuffling through the documents. He'd been William's attorney for over 20 years, and I could see the sadness in his weathered face. He'd genuinely cared for my husband, unlike some others in this room. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Henderson began, his voice formal but gentle. "We're here today to read the last will and testament of William Edward Morrison, who passed on the 15th of November. Nola leaned forward, her lips curving into what she probably thought was an appropriate expression of grief, but I could see the excitement dancing in her eyes. She'd been waiting for this moment for years. "Before we begin," Mr. Henderson continued, "I want to express my condolences to the family. William was a good man, and his loss is deeply felt." Yes, Nola interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Can we please get to the important part? I mean, we all know why we're here." Blaine shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Nola, please, show some respect." She shot him a look that could freeze water. "Respect? Blaine, your father is gone. What he wanted was for us to be taken care of. Finally, we can live the life we deserve, the life his fortune can provide." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned to school my features over the years, to hide the pain that Nola's casual cruelty caused. But inside, I was screaming. This woman had systematically poisoned my relationship with my son, turned my grandchildren against me, and now she was practically celebrating my husband's death. Mr. Henderson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Morrison, perhaps we could proceed with dignity." Nola laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Dignity? That's rich coming from someone who's about to make me a very wealthy woman." She glanced around the room, her gaze finally landing on me. "Finally, I'll be able to live off his fortune. No more pretending to care about family dinners or listening to endless stories about the good old days." A few people in the room, distant relatives who'd shown up hoping for crumbs, actually chuckled. The sound made my stomach turn. I reached into my purse, my fingers finding the familiar weight of the sealed envelope I'd been carrying for 3 days. William had given it to me a week before he died, when he could barely lift his head from the pillow. "Myrtle," he'd whispered, his voice barely audible. "When they read the will, when she shows her true colors, give this to Henderson. Promise me." I'd promised, not knowing what the envelope contained, but trusting my husband of 43 years completely. Now, as Nola continued her disgusting display, I knew the time was coming. "The distribution of assets," Mr. Henderson read, "begins with the primary residence at 15 Oakwood Drive, valued at approximately $1,200,000. Nola's eyes lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. "Finally?" she breathed. But I noticed something in Mr. Henderson's expression, a carefully controlled tension, as if he were waiting for something. His eyes met mine briefly, and I saw a question there. Not yet, I thought. Let her show everyone exactly who she is. The house, Mr. Henderson continued, along with all furnishings and personal effects therein, is to be divided equally between Blaine Morrison and his mother, Myrtle Morrison. Nola's smile faltered slightly. Divided? What does that mean exactly? It means, Mr. Henderson explained patiently, that your husband and his mother will share ownership of the property. That's ridiculous, Nola snapped. Blaine, tell him that's ridiculous. Your mother is 62 years old. What does she need with a house that big? She should be moving into some little apartment somewhere, not taking up space in our inheritance. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept them folded in my lap. This was exactly what William had expected, what he'd prepared for. Blaine looked mortified. Nola, that's my mother you're talking about. So? She's had her time, Blaine. This is about our future, our children's future, not some sentimental attachment to a woman who barely raised you anyway. The room fell silent. Even the distant relatives looked uncomfortable now. I stood up slowly, my legs steadier than I'd expected them to be. I walked around the table to where Mr. Henderson sat and placed the envelope in front of him. Read this aloud, please, I said quietly. Mr. Henderson looked at the envelope, then at me. I could see recognition dawning in his eyes. William had told him about this, had prepared him. He carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the document inside. As his eyes scanned the page, a slow smile spread across his face. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, I have here a codicil to Mr. Morrison's will, properly witnessed and notarized, dated just 1 week before his passing. Nola went very still. A what? A codicil, an addition to the will that modifies certain provisions. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and began to read, but I could see him fighting back laughter. Whatever William had written in that envelope, whatever surprise he'd prepared, it was about to change everything. And from the way Nola's face was slowly draining of all color, I had a feeling it was going to be everything I'd dreamed of and more. As Mr. Henderson prepared to read the codicil, my mind drifted back to how we'd gotten to this moment. The years of subtle manipulation, the gradual erosion of my relationship with Blaine, and the systematic way Nola had carved me out of my own family's life. It started slowly, as these things always do. When Blaine first brought Nola home 15 years ago, she'd been charming, sweet even. She'd complimented my cooking, asked about my garden, and seemed genuinely interested in family stories. I should have seen through it then, but I was so happy that my son had found someone who made him smile. The first red flag came during their engagement party. I'd offered to help plan it, wanting to be involved in this important milestone. Nola had smiled and said, "Oh, Mrs. Morrison, that's so sweet, but I really think this should be about Blaine and me, don't you? Something intimate, just our style. Our style, as if I wasn't part of the family anymore. But Blaine had been so happy, so I'd stepped back. I told myself it was natural for a young woman to want to establish her own traditions. William had gently reminded me that we'd done the same thing when we were young, wanting independence from our parents. The wedding was beautiful, I'll give her that. Nola looked stunning in her $15,000 dress, every detail perfect. But somehow, every suggestion I'd made had been quietly dismissed. The flowers I'd recommended were too traditional. The menu I'd proposed was not quite right for the vision. Even the photographer I'd suggested, someone who'd captured our family for years, was replaced with someone more contemporary. I found myself relegated to the role of spectator at my own son's wedding. The real campaign began after they moved into their house, a gorgeous colonial that William and I had helped them buy with a down payment of $200,000. Suddenly, our weekly family dinners became monthly, then sporadic. When I'd call to invite them over, Nola would answer with barely concealed irritation. "Oh, Myrtle, we're just so busy with work and settling into the house. Maybe next month?" Next month never came. When my first grandchild, Emma, was born, I was over the moon. I'd knitted blankets, bought toys, and prepared the spare room for babysitting duties. But somehow, I was always the last to know about important moments. I'd find out through Blaine's casual mentions that Emma had taken her first steps, said her first word, or lost her first tooth. "Why didn't you call me?" I'd ask, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "We did call," Nola would say sweetly. "You must have been out. We left a message." But I was never out. I worked part-time at the library, and I was always home by 4 o'clock. There were no messages. The second grandchild, little James, came 3 years later. By then, I'd learned not to expect invitations to birthday parties or school events. I'd drive by their house sometimes, seeing cars in the driveway during what I later learned were family gatherings I wasn't invited to. William tried to intervene, bless his heart. He'd take Blaine aside during the rare occasions we saw them and ask direct questions. "Son, why don't you bring the kids over more often? Your mother misses them." Blaine would look uncomfortable, glancing toward wherever Nola was standing. "We will, Dad. It's just been busy, you know how it is." But I could see the change in my son. The man who used to call me every Sunday, who'd drop by unannounced just to chat, had become distant, formal. When he did visit, he seemed anxious, checking his phone constantly, cutting conversations short. The breaking point came during Emma's 8th birthday party. I'd asked Blaine if I could attend, and he'd promised to check with Nola. When he called back, his voice was strained. "Mom, Nola thinks it might be better if it's just close family this year. You understand, right?" Close family. I was close family. I was the child's grandmother. "Blaine, what's happening to us?" I'd asked, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. "I feel like I'm losing you." There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Mom," Nola says. "She says you don't really connect with the kids, that you make them uncomfortable with all your old-fashioned ideas and stories. She thinks it's better if we give them some space to be themselves." Old-fashioned ideas, making them uncomfortable. These were my grandchildren, children I'd loved from the moment they were born. That night, I'd cried myself to sleep while William held me, his own heart breaking as he watched what Nola was doing to our family. "She's isolating him," he'd said quietly. "Classic manipulation. Make him choose between his wife and his mother, and make it seem like the choice is obvious." Over the following years, the isolation became complete. Christmas mornings without grandchildren's laughter. Mother's Days spent alone, while Nola posted pictures on social media of elaborate brunches with her own mother, captioned, "The best mother-in-law a girl could ask for." I'd watch from the sidelines as Nola documented their perfect family life online. Beach vacations I wasn't invited to, birthday celebrations I wasn't told about, school plays I didn't know were happening. Each post was like a knife to my heart, a reminder of everything I'd lost. The children grew up thinking I was this distant, uninvolved grandmother who didn't care about them. On the rare occasions I did see them, they were polite but cool, clearly having absorbed whatever story they'd been told about why Grandma Myrtle wasn't around much. William saw it all. He documented it too, in his quiet way. I'd find him writing in his study sometimes, making notes about phone calls that were ignored, invitations that were declined, events we learned about after the fact. "What are you writing, dear?" I'd ask, just keeping track. He'd say grimly, "Someday, someone needs to know the truth." The final blow came last year, during William's 70th birthday. I'd planned a small family dinner, nothing elaborate, just us and Blaine's family. Nola had agreed to come, but when they arrived, she spent the entire evening on her phone, making pointed comments about how stuffy our house was and how the children were clearly bored. When it was time to cut the cake, she'd announced loudly, "Well, this has been lovely, but the kids have school tomorrow. We really should go." William had barely blown out his candles. As they were leaving, I heard Nola whisper to Emma, "Poor Grandpa. He doesn't realize how exhausting these family things are. When I'm his age, I hope someone has the sense to keep me entertained instead of forcing people to sit through boring old stories." That was the moment William decided enough was enough. Now, sitting in this conference room, watching Mr. Henderson prepare to read William's final surprise, I felt a mixture of grief and anticipation. My husband had spent the last months of his life carefully, methodically preparing for this moment. And from the way Nola was starting to fidget in her chair, from the way her confident smile was beginning to crack around the edges, I had a feeling William's plan was about to exceed even my wildest hopes for justice. Mr. Henderson adjusted his reading glasses and looked directly at Nola before beginning to read from the codicil. The silence in the room was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock in the corner ticking away the seconds. "This codicil," he began, his voice steady and professional, "addresses specific concerns regarding the character and conduct of certain beneficiaries, as observed and documented by the deceased in the months preceding his death." Nola's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment. "What does that mean? William never said anything about documenting anything." "I'm sure he didn't," Mr. Henderson replied dryly. "Shall I continue?" He cleared his throat and resumed reading. "To my beloved wife Myrtle, who has endured 15 years of systematic emotional abuse and manipulation at the hands of my daughter-in-law, I leave the following evidence, recorded without the knowledge of the parties involved, between the dates of September 1st and November 10th of this year." My heart started pounding. William had been recording things? How? When? Mr. Henderson reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small digital device. "The deceased left specific instructions that these recordings be played during the reading of the will, in the presence of all beneficiaries." Blaine looked confused. "Dad was recording conversations? That doesn't sound like him." "Actually," Mr. Henderson said, pressing a button on the device, "it sounds exactly like him. Your father was a methodical man who believed in truth and justice. He spent his final months gathering evidence of what your mother has been enduring." The first recording began to play, and I recognized the setting immediately. It was from 3 months ago, during one of their rare visits to our house. William must have had a recording device hidden in the living room. Nola's voice came through crystal clear. "I don't know why we have to keep doing this, Blaine. Your mother is becoming more pathetic by the day. Did you see how desperate she looked when she was trying to show Emma those old photo albums?" "She's just trying to connect with the kids," Blaine's voice responded, sounding tired. "Connect? She's embarrassing them. Emma told me afterward that Grandma Myrtle smells like old people and that her stories are boring. James actually asked me if we have to keep visiting." My chest tightened hearing this. Those weren't things my grandchildren had said. I would have seen it in their faces. Nola was putting words in their mouths. The recording continued. "I think it's time we started limiting these visits even more. Maybe just holidays, and only the major ones. Your mother had her time to be a parent, and frankly, she wasn't very good at it. Now it's time for her to step back and let the real family take over. The real family." The words hit me like a slap. Blaine's voice came through the speakers, weaker now. "Nola, that's harsh. She raised me, and she did a good job." "Did she, though? Blaine, look at yourself honestly. You have trouble making decisions. You defer to authority figures constantly, and you have no real backbone when it comes to standing up for yourself. Those are the signs of a child who wasn't properly guided." I watched my son's face as he heard his wife's assessment of him, saw the color drain from his cheeks. This was how she spoke about him when he wasn't around to defend himself. "Your mother," Nola's recorded voice continued, "is one of those clingy, needy women who can't let go of their children. She sees our success, our beautiful home, our happy marriage, and she wants to insert herself into it because her own life is so empty and pathetic." Mr. Henderson paused the recording. The room was dead silent except for the sound of someone, I think it was one of the distant relatives, shifting uncomfortably in their chair. Nola was staring at the device as if it were a snake about to strike. "This is illegal," she said, her voice higher than usual. "You can't record people without their permission." "Actually, Mr. Henderson replied calmly. In this state, only one party needs to consent to a recording, and since these conversations took place in William's own home, he was well within his legal rights. He pressed play again, and this time the recording was from a different day. I recognized the background noise. It was from the children's back-to-school night 2 months ago, an event I hadn't even known was happening until I overheard Blaine mentioning it to William on the phone. I told the teacher that Grandma Myrtle lives far away and doesn't see the children very often, Nola's voice explained. I said she's getting older and has health problems that make it difficult for her to be involved. The teacher was very understanding. Health problems. I was 62 years old and in perfect health. I walked 3 miles every morning and volunteered at the library 4 days a week. Did you really have to lie? Blaine asked. It's not lying. It's managing the situation. Do you want Emma's teacher asking uncomfortable questions about why your mother never comes to school events? It's easier if everyone just assumes she's not capable. Not capable. This woman had spent years systematically destroying my reputation, making people believe I was some kind of invalid who couldn't participate in my own grandchildren's lives. The recording continued. Besides, it's better for the children this way. They don't need the confusion of having too many authority figures in their lives. They need consistency, and they get that from us. Your mother would just undermine the values we're trying to instill. What values is she undermining exactly? Blaine asked. Oh, Blaine, you know how she is. All that old-fashioned nonsense about family dinner every Sunday, about respecting your elders, about sacrifice and duty. The children need to learn about independence, about putting themselves first, about not being tied down by guilt and obligation. Family dinner every Sunday, respecting elders. These were the old-fashioned values that Nola found so objectionable. These were the things that made me unfit to be around my own grandchildren. Mr. Henderson stopped the recording again and looked around the room. Several people were staring at Nola with undisguised shock. Even the distant relatives who had chuckled at her earlier comments looked uncomfortable. There are 17 more recordings, Mr. Henderson announced. Some from phone conversations, others from visits to your home when Mr. Morrison was installing what he called security equipment, but was actually a sophisticated recording system. Nola shot to her feet. This is outrageous. You can't just spy on people and then use it against them in a will reading. Actually, Mr. Henderson said, his voice taking on a harder edge. I can and I will, because your father-in-law specifically requested it. He wanted everyone in this room to understand exactly who you are and what you've done to this family. He pressed play on a third recording, and this time I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was Nola talking to someone on the phone. A friend, maybe, or her sister. The old man is finally starting to decline, she was saying. Blaine doesn't see it yet, but I can tell. He's getting forgetful, moving slower. I give him maybe 2 years, 3 at the outside. Are you sure? A woman's voice asked. Oh, I'm sure. And the best part is, he absolutely adores me. He has no idea what I really think about his precious family. By the time he goes, Blaine will be so dependent on my version of reality that he won't even question it. What about the mother? What about her? Nola laughed, a sound like ice cracking. She'll be completely isolated by then. I've been working on it for years. The kids barely know her. Blaine feels guilty every time he talks to her, and she's too proud to fight back. By the time William dies, she'll just be this sad old woman that everyone feels sorry for. The recording ended, and the silence that followed was deafening. I looked at my son, saw the tears in his eyes, saw the way his hands were shaking. Nola, he said quietly, is this really how you feel? She was trapped now, caught between the truth that had just been revealed and the lies she'd been living. For a moment, I thought she might try to deny it all, claim the recordings were fake or taken out of context. Instead, she did something even more revealing. She got angry. You want to know how I really feel? She snapped, turning to face me directly. Fine. Yes, I think you're a pathetic old woman who can't accept that your time is over. Yes, I've been protecting my children from your outdated, suffocating influence. And yes, I've been counting the days until William died so we could finally live our lives without having to pretend we care about your feelings." The room erupted. Blaine stood up so fast his chair fell over backward. Two of the distant relatives gasped audibly. Even Mr. Henderson looked stunned by her venom. But I just sat there, strangely calm, because finally, after 15 years, everyone could see exactly who Nola really was. And I had a feeling William's surprises were just getting started. The aftermath of Nola's outburst hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Blaine was staring at his wife as if seeing her for the first time, his face a mixture of shock, hurt, and something that looked like the beginning of rage. "Nola," he said slowly, "do you realize what you just said? Do you understand what you just admitted to?" She looked around the room, seeming to finally grasp that she'd revealed too much. I could see her mind working, trying to find a way back from the precipice she'd thrown herself over. "I was upset," she said, her voice taking on that wheedling tone she used when she wanted something. "People say things they don't mean when they're emotional. You all ambushed me with those recordings." "Ambushed you?" Mr. Henderson's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Morrison, those were your own words, spoken freely in what you believed were private conversations. No one forced you to say any of those things." "But you don't understand the context," she protested, looking desperately at Blaine. "I was trying to protect our family unit. Sometimes you have to make hard choices about who gets priority in your life." I watched my son's face as he processed this. 42 years old, and he was finally seeing his wife clearly for the first time. "Priority," he repeated quietly. "My mother raised me by herself after Dad's first heart attack when I was 12. She worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and still managed to be at every baseball game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. And you've been telling me for 15 years that she wasn't a good parent?" Nola's jaw tightened. "Blaine, you're being dramatic. I never said she wasn't adequate. I just said she was suffocating and needed to give us space to build our own family." "You called her pathetic," Blaine said, his voice growing stronger. "You said she smelled like old people. You told lies to our children's teachers about her health. How is any of that about giving us space?" Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "If I may, there's more to the codicil. The recordings were just the first part." He picked up the papers again, and I could see Nola's hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "William Morrison, being of sound mind and body, and having documented the systematic emotional abuse perpetrated against his wife by his daughter-in-law, hereby institutes the following conditions for the distribution of his estate." Conditions. My heart started beating faster. William had put conditions on the inheritance. "First," Mr. Henderson continued, "the house at 15 Oakwood Drive, previously designated to be shared between Blaine Morrison and Myrtle Morrison, shall now be transferred in its entirety to Myrtle Morrison, with the provision that she may allow other family members to visit at her discretion." Nola went white. "What? That's impossible. Blaine is the son. He should inherit the house. Second," Mr. Henderson read on, ignoring her protest, "the investment portfolio valued at approximately $800,000, previously designated for Blaine Morrison, shall be placed in trust for Emma Morrison and James Morrison, to be administered by their grandmother, Myrtle Morrison, until they reach the age of 25. "You can't do this!" Nola shrieked, jumping to her feet. "That money belongs to us. We're his immediate family. Third," Mr. Henderson's voice grew stern, "Nola Morrison shall receive an inheritance of exactly $1, along with an itemized bill for the emotional distress caused to the deceased's wife over the past 15 years. The room fell silent, except for Nola's sharp breathing. An itemized bill. Even in death, William was making a point. "However," Mr. Henderson continued, and I noticed a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "Mrs. Nola Morrison may earn additional inheritance through the completion of specific tasks designed to demonstrate genuine remorse and character growth." Tasks. William had given her tasks to complete if she wanted any of his money. "What kind of tasks?" Blaine asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Henderson pulled out another sheet of paper. "Task 1. Mrs. Nola Morrison must personally visit every person she has prevented from having a relationship with Emma and James Morrison over the past 10 years, apologize in writing for her actions, and request their forgiveness. These apologies must be witnessed and notarized. Nola's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That's humiliating. Task 2, Mr. Henderson continued. Mrs. Nola Morrison must write a detailed letter to Emma and James Morrison, explaining why their grandmother was absent from their lives, taking full responsibility for her actions, and encouraging them to build a relationship with Myrtle Morrison. I won't do it, Nola said flatly. This is insane. You can't make me humiliate myself for money that should rightfully be ours anyway. Task 3, Mr. Henderson read, his voice now definitely containing amusement. Mrs. Nola Morrison must volunteer at a senior center for no less than 200 hours, serving meals and assisting elderly residents with daily activities, while wearing a name tag that identifies her as learning to respect my elders. Several people in the room made choking sounds that might have been suppressed laughter. Even I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. William had really thought this through. This is ridiculous, Nola exploded. I'm not doing any of this. Blaine, tell them this is ridiculous. But Blaine was staring at the papers in Mr. Henderson's hands with something like wonder. Dad actually planned all this, he said softly. He knew exactly what you were doing, and he planned all this. Task 4, Mr. Henderson continued relentlessly. Mrs. Nola Morrison must attend family therapy sessions with her husband and children, with a therapist chosen by Myrtle Morrison, for a minimum of 6 months. I don't need therapy, Nola snapped. There's nothing wrong with me. And finally, Task 5, Mr. Henderson concluded. Mrs. Nola Morrison must write a public apology to be published in the local newspaper, acknowledging her mistreatment of Myrtle Morrison and taking full responsibility for damaging the family relationships. The silence that followed was profound. I could see Nola's mind racing, calculating the humiliation against the potential financial gain. How much? She asked finally, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. How much would I get if I completed all these ridiculous tasks? Mr. Henderson consulted his papers. Upon completion of all 5 tasks, to be verified by independent witnesses, Mrs. Nola Morrison would receive the sum of $50,000. $50,000? Nola's voice rose to a shriek. That's it? After everything I'd have to do, after all that humiliation, I'd get $50,000. Yes, Mr. Henderson said simply. And if you refuse to complete the tasks, or if you complete some but not all, you receive only the $1 specified in the original bequest. Nola turned to Blaine, her face flushed with anger and desperation. Blaine, you can't let them do this to me. I'm your wife. We have children together. That money should come to our family. But something had changed in my son's face. The weak, uncertain expression he'd worn for so many years was gone, replaced by something harder, more determined. Nola, he said quietly, for the first time in our marriage, I think I'm seeing exactly who you are. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Blaine said, standing up slowly, that I need to think about whether I want to be married to someone who could treat my mother the way you've treated her. The color drained from Nola's face. You don't mean that. Blaine, we have a life together. We have children. You can't throw that away because of some silly recordings and a vindictive old man's revenge fantasy. Revenge fantasy? I spoke for the first time since handing over the envelope, my voice steady and calm. Nola? My husband didn't want revenge. He wanted truth. And now everyone in this room knows exactly what that truth is. She whirled to face me, her carefully constructed mask finally completely gone. You think you've won something here, don't you? You think this changes anything? I stood up slowly, feeling stronger than I had in years. I think, I said quietly, that for the first time in 15 years, my son knows who his real family is. Nola looked around the room desperately, seeking an ally, someone who would take her side, but the distant relatives were studiously avoiding eye contact, and Mr. Henderson was quietly organizing his papers with an air of professional satisfaction. This isn't over, she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'll contest this. I'll hire lawyers. I'll prove that William was mentally incompetent when he wrote this." Mr. Henderson looked up from his papers. "Mrs. Morrison, your father-in-law anticipated that possibility. The codicil was reviewed and approved by 2 independent physicians who certified his mental competency. Additionally, there are psychiatric evaluations on file confirming his sound state of mind. William had thought of everything. Even from the grave, he was protecting me, protecting our family from the woman who had tried to destroy it." Nola grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back one last time. "Choose carefully, Blaine," she said, her voice cold as winter, "because once you side with her, there's no going back." And then she was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her expensive perfume and the echo of 15 years of lies finally brought to light. The days following the will reading unfolded like a slow-motion earthquake. Nola had stormed out of the lawyer's office, but she didn't stay gone. Within 24 hours, she was back, and this time she came armed with a strategy that was both desperate and vindictive. I was in my garden the next morning, tending to the roses that William had planted for our 20th anniversary, when I heard raised voices from the house next door. Blaine had moved back into his childhood bedroom the night before, telling me he needed space to think about his marriage. Through the thin walls, I could hear Nola's voice, sharp and demanding. "You cannot be serious about this, Blaine. You're going to throw away 16 years of marriage because of some manipulative recordings made by a bitter old man?" "They weren't manipulative." Blaine's voice was quieter but firm. "They were true. Every word you said on those recordings was exactly how you really feel." I tried not to listen, but their voices carried through the open windows. Part of me felt guilty for eavesdropping, but another part, the part that had been silenced for so many years, needed to hear this conversation. "I was venting!" Nola's voice grew shriller. "Everyone vents about their in-laws. It doesn't mean I actually hate your mother." "You called her pathetic, Nola. You said she smelled like old people. You told our children's teachers that she was sick so they wouldn't ask why she never came to school events. How is that just venting?" There was a long pause, and when Nola spoke again, her voice had taken on that manipulative sweetness I knew so well. "Baby, I was protecting our family. Your mother has always been intense. She wanted to be involved in everything, and I thought it was better for the kids to have some space. I was trying to help her maintain her dignity by creating some natural distance. Even from my garden, I could hear the lies rolling off her tongue like honey, but Blaine wasn't buying it anymore. Natural distance? Nola. She's their grandmother. She's my mother. The only intense thing about her was how much she loved us, and you turned that into something wrong. She was suffocating us." "No," Blaine said, and his voice carried a strength I hadn't heard in years. "You were suffocating me. You made me feel guilty every time I wanted to call her, every time I wanted to bring the kids to see her. You made me choose between my wife and my mother, and I chose wrong." I had to sit down on the garden bench, overwhelmed by hearing my son finally understand what had happened to our family. Later that afternoon, Nola appeared at my front door. She'd clearly spent time preparing for this encounter. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and she wore a demure blue dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. "Myrtle," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity, "I think we need to talk." I invited her in, curious to see what approach she would take. She settled onto my living room sofa, the same sofa where she'd made those cruel comments that William had recorded. "I want to apologize," she began, "for the things I said in those recordings. I was stressed and overwhelmed, and I said things I didn't mean. You know how marriage can be. Sometimes you say things about your in-laws that come out harsher than you intended." I studied her face, looking for any sign of genuine remorse. There was none. This was a performance, carefully calculated to get what she wanted. "Which things didn't you mean?" I asked quietly. She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Well, all of it, really. I don't actually think you're pathetic, and I certainly don't think you smell bad. That was just frustration talking. What about keeping me away from Emma and James? What about lying to their teachers?" What about making Blaine feel guilty for wanting to have a relationship with me? Her mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw a flash of the real Nola underneath. I think there were misunderstandings on both sides, she said carefully. Maybe we could start fresh, put the past behind us and focus on being a family. And William's conditions? The tasks he set for you? Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Those tasks are designed to humiliate me, Myrtle. Surely you can see that. Making me volunteer at a senior center with a degrading name tag? Forcing me to write public apologies? That's not about making amends. That's about revenge. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a calmness I hadn't experienced in years. Nola, do you want to know what I think? She nodded eagerly, probably expecting me to agree with her. I think William designed those tasks perfectly. Each one addresses exactly the kind of cruelty you've shown. You've disrespected elderly people, including me, so you need to learn to serve them. You've damaged relationships through lies, so you need to repair them with truth. You've avoided accountability, so you need to take public responsibility. Her face flushed. So you're not going to help me? You're going to let him destroy our family from beyond the grave? Our family? I repeated. Nola, you destroyed our family 15 years ago. William just made sure everyone could finally see it. She stood up abruptly, her composure cracking. Fine, but don't think this is over. I know Blaine, and I know our children. They need stability, and I can provide that in ways you never could. This little victory of yours won't last. After she left, I called Blaine. He came over within minutes, looking haggard and older than his 42 years. She tried to convince you to intercede for her, didn't she? He asked, settling into William's old recliner. She did. She seems to think the tasks your father set are unreasonable. Blaine was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, those recordings, was that really how she talked about you all the time? I considered my answer carefully. Blaine, what you heard in those recordings was actually mild compared to some of the things she said directly to me over the years. Your father only recorded a few conversations. There were hundreds of others. His face crumpled. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. How did I not see it? How did I let this happen? You loved your wife and wanted to trust her. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. It's human nature. But I should have seen how she was treating you. I should have stood up for you. I reached over and took his hand. You were in an impossible situation. Nola is very skilled at manipulation. She made you feel like you had to choose, and she made it seem like choosing her was the only reasonable option. What do I do now? He asked, his voice breaking. I have 2 children who think you don't care about them. I have a wife who's not the person I thought she was. I have a marriage that might be over. How do I fix any of this? One step at a time, I said. First, tell me about Emma and James. What do they really think about me? Blaine was quiet for a long moment. I don't think they think about you much at all, he admitted. Nola's been so successful at keeping you at a distance that you're almost like a stranger to them. They know you exist, but they don't really know who you are. It hurt to hear, but it wasn't surprising. Would you be willing to bring them over sometime? Without Nola? Just so they could get to know their grandmother? I'd like that, he said. But Mom, you should know. Nola's not going to make this easy. She's already talking about taking the kids and moving back to her mother's house in Portland. My heart sank. Can she do that? Legally? Probably not without my consent, but she can make my life hell trying. Over the next week, I watched Nola's desperation escalate. She showed up at Blaine's office, causing such a scene that security had to escort her out. She called my house at all hours, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming, sometimes trying to negotiate. I'll do one of the tasks, she offered during one particularly pathetic phone call, the volunteer work. I'll do the volunteer work, but not with that ridiculous name tag. That's not how it works, I told her calmly. William was very specific. All 5 tasks, completed exactly as outlined or nothing. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She spat. You're enjoying watching me suffer. No, Nola, I'm not. I'm sad that it came to this. I'm sad that you spent 15 years destroying relationships instead of building them. I'm sad that my grandchildren don't know me because of the lies you told. But am I enjoying watching you face consequences for your actions? I suppose I am. The breaking point came when she tried to use Emma and James as weapons. She picked them up from school early one day and brought them to my house, clearly having coached them beforehand. Grandma Myrtle, 12-year-old Emma said, her voice stilted and uncomfortable. Mommy says you're trying to take Daddy away from us. My heart broke looking at these children. My grandchildren, who barely knew me but had been taught to see me as a threat. Oh, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to Emma's level. I would never try to take your daddy away from you. I love your daddy very much, and I love you and James too, even though we haven't had much chance to get to know each other. 9-year-old James hung back behind his sister, clearly unsure about this woman he'd been told was his grandmother. Mommy says you don't like her, Emma continued, obviously reciting a script. She says you're trying to punish her because Daddy inherited money. I looked up at Nola, who was standing in my doorway with a triumphant smile. She thought she'd found the perfect weapon, children who would make me feel guilty enough to back down. But she'd miscalculated. These children deserved the truth, age-appropriate truth, but truth nonetheless. Emma James, I said gently, your mommy and I have had some disagreements about family. Sometimes adults don't get along perfectly, and that's okay. But what's not okay is when those disagreements keep families apart. I've missed so much of your lives, and I hope we can start spending more time together. Will you make Mommy and Daddy stop fighting? James asked, speaking for the first time. Before I could answer, Blaine's voice came from behind Nola. What are you doing here? I'm helping the children understand what's happening to their family, Nola said defensively. By using them as messengers? By coaching them to say things that make Mom feel guilty? Blaine stepped into the house, his face dark with anger. Nola, this is exactly the kind of manipulation Dad was talking about. I'm protecting our children. No, Blaine said firmly. You're traumatizing them. Emma James, go wait in the car. Mommy and I need to talk. After the children left, Blaine turned to face his wife. This ends now. You don't get to use our kids as weapons in whatever game you think you're playing. Game? Nola's voice rose to a shriek. This isn't a game, Blaine. This is my life, our life, being destroyed by your vindictive dead father and your pathetic mother. The mask was completely off now. Even I was shocked by the venom in her voice. Pack your things, Blaine said quietly. I want you out of the house by tonight. You can't kick me out? It's my house too. Actually, Blaine said, pulling out his phone. I called my lawyer this morning. Since the house is in my name only, and since you've just threatened my mother in front of witnesses, I absolutely can ask you to leave. Nola stared at him for a long moment, and I could see her realizing that she'd finally pushed too far. The tears that came then weren't manipulative. They were real, born of the understanding that she'd lost everything. But even in defeat, she couldn't resist one final cruel blow. You'll regret this, she said, looking directly at me. Both of you. Those children will hate you for breaking up their family. They'll never forgive you for destroying their mother. After she left, Blaine and I sat in my living room, both of us emotionally drained. Did I do the right thing? He asked. I thought about Emma and James, about the confusion and pain they were feeling, about the long road ahead to heal the damage that had been done. You did the only thing you could do, I said. You chose truth over lies, love over manipulation. Your children will understand someday. As if summoned by my words, my phone rang. It was Mr. Henderson. Mrs. Morrison, he said. I thought you should know. Mrs. Nola Morrison contacted my office this afternoon. She wants to discuss the possibility of completing the tasks outlined in your husband's will. I smiled, feeling William's presence as if he were standing right beside me. Tell her, I said, that she's welcome to try. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making Sunday dinner for the first time in 15 years with my grandchildren helping me. Emma was carefully setting the table with my good china, the same china Nola had once called old-fashioned and depressing, while James stirred the gravy with the intense concentration that only a 9-year-old could bring to such an important task. "Grandma Myrtle," Emma said, pausing in her table setting, "why didn't we used to come for Sunday dinner? Daddy says you always made Sunday dinner, but I don't remember ever eating here before." I glanced at Blaine, who was sitting at the kitchen counter reading the newspaper, another Sunday tradition we'd restored. He gave me a slight nod, letting me know it was okay to answer honestly. "Well, sweetheart," I said carefully, "your mommy thought it might be too much for you to have dinner at 2 different houses every week. She wanted to make sure you had time to just be kids and play with your friends." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough truth for a 12-year-old to understand. Emma seemed satisfied with the answer and went back to arranging the silverware with the precision of a surgeon. The past 6 months had been a journey of healing, discovery, and yes, some satisfaction at watching Nola struggle with the consequences of her actions. True to her word, she had attempted to complete William's tasks, the key word being attempted. Task 1, personally apologizing to everyone she'd kept away from the children, had lasted exactly 3 visits. She'd managed to write stilted, clearly insincere apologies to my sister Margaret and to my friend Dorothy from the library, both of whom had been systematically excluded from family events over the years. But when she got to Mrs. Chen, Emma's kindergarten teacher, who had specifically asked about grandparent involvement, only to be told I was too ill to participate, Nola had stormed out mid-apology when Mrs. Chen asked pointed questions about why she'd lied. "She was hostile," Nola complained to Mr. Henderson. "She wasn't accepting my apology in good faith. Perhaps, Mr. Henderson had replied dryly, because she could tell it wasn't offered in good faith. Task 2, writing a letter to Emma and James explaining why their grandmother had been absent, never got completed at all. Nola wrote 17 different drafts, each one blaming everyone but herself, before finally admitting she couldn't bring herself to take responsibility in writing. "I'm not going to traumatize my children by telling them their mother is a terrible person," she'd told Blaine during one of their increasingly rare conversations. "Nobody asked you to call yourself a terrible person," Blaine had replied. "Dad asked you to tell them the truth about why Mom wasn't around. There's a difference." Task 3, volunteering at the senior center, provided the most entertainment, though I felt somewhat guilty about enjoying it so much. Nola lasted exactly 6 days at Sunset Manor, where the residents had quickly sized up her attitude and responded accordingly. Mrs. Patterson, a sharp-tongued 92-year-old former schoolteacher, had reportedly told Nola, "Young lady, I've been eating longer than you've been alive, and I don't need you sighing dramatically every time you bring me my meal." When Nola complained to the volunteer coordinator that the residents were difficult and ungrateful, she was politely informed that perhaps senior care wasn't her calling. The name tag reading, "Learning to Respect My Elders," never got worn. Nola claimed it was degrading and psychologically harmful. Task 4, family therapy, actually started promisingly. Dr. Sarah Williams, the therapist I'd chosen, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who specialized in family dysfunction and manipulation. For the first 3 sessions, Nola had been on her best behavior, playing the role of the concerned mother and wife who just wanted to heal her family. But Dr. Williams was too experienced to be fooled. By the 4th session, she was asking direct questions that Nola couldn't deflect with charm and tears. "Nola, Dr. Williams had said during what turned out to be the final session, "You've spent 4 weeks talking about everyone else's behavior and how it affected you. Can you tell me about a specific instance where your own actions might have contributed to the family problems?" According to Blaine, who continued with the therapy sessions alone, Nola had spent 20 minutes trying to reframe every example as being someone else's fault, before finally declaring that Dr. Williams was clearly biased and walking out. Task 5, the public apology, never even got started. The thought of admitting wrongdoing in print, where it could be preserved forever, was apparently too much for Nola's pride to bear. By the end of 3 months, it was clear that Nola would never complete Williams' requirements. She would get her $1 and nothing more. But the real victory wasn't in Nola's failure. It was in what grew from the space her absence created. Blaine had filed for divorce in February. The proceedings were swift and relatively amicable, mainly because Nola was so focused on trying to claim William's inheritance that she didn't fight hard enough for custody or support. She got her 50-50 custody arrangement, but the children spent most of their weekends and school holidays with Blaine, which meant they spent them with me too. "Grandma," James said now, pulling me back to the present. "The gravy's getting thick. Is that good or bad?" I checked his handiwork and smiled. "That's perfect, sweetheart. Just like your grandfather used to make it." Emma looked up from her place setting. "Daddy says Grandpa left us money for college." "He did," I confirmed. "He wanted to make sure you and James could study whatever you wanted without worrying about how to pay for it." "Mommy says you're controlling the money to control us," Emma said matter-of-factly. And I marveled at how children could deliver such loaded statements with complete innocence. Blaine looked up from his newspaper, his face darkening. "Emma, that's not true, and it's not appropriate for your mother to say things like that to you." "I know," Emma said, surprising us both. "Mrs. Chen told me that Mommy used to lie about why you didn't come to school things, Grandma. And Mrs. Patterson at Mommy's volunteer place said Mommy was rude to old people. I'm not stupid." At 12, Emma was indeed not stupid. She was also not as easily manipulated as her mother seemed to think. Children, I'd learned, have a remarkable ability to recognize truth when they hear it, even when it conflicts with what they've been told. "Your mom loves you very much," I said carefully. "And she's going through a difficult time right now. Sometimes when people are hurting, they say things that aren't quite fair." "Are you and Daddy hurting too?" James asked, looking up from the gravy with concern. Blaine set down his newspaper and moved to where James was standing. "We were hurting, buddy. For a long time, we were very sad because we missed each other. But now we're together again, and that makes us happy." "Even though Mommy's not here?" It was the question I'd been dreading and hoping for. These children needed to understand that their family hadn't been destroyed. It had been healed. "James," I said, sitting down so I was at his eye level, "there are lots of different ways to be a family. You and Emma will always have your mommy, and you'll always have your daddy. And now you also get to have me. That's not fewer people loving you. That's more people loving you." "But why can't we all be together?" Emma asked, the 12-year-old in her still hoping for the fairy tale ending. Blaine answered this one. "Because sometimes adults hurt each other so much that they can't live together anymore. But that doesn't mean they stop loving their children. Your mom will always be your mom, and I'll always be your dad, and Grandma will always be your grandma. We just love you from different houses now." After dinner, we settled into the living room for our new Sunday tradition, looking through photo albums. I'd spent the past months organizing decades of pictures that documented Emma and James's lives from a distance. Pictures I'd taken at school events Nola didn't know I attended, photos from birthdays I'd watched from across the street, Christmas mornings I'd experienced only through the gifts I'd sent that were politely acknowledged but never mentioned. "Look," Emma said, pointing to a picture of herself at age 5, missing her front teeth and grinning at the camera. "You were at my kindergarten graduation. I remember that day." "I was there," I confirmed. "I was in the back, but I was there." "Why didn't you come sit with us?" James asked. Blaine and I exchanged a look. We'd agreed to answer their questions honestly but age-appropriately. "Your mommy thought it might be confusing for you to have too many grown-ups there," I said. "She wanted your special day to be simple and calm." "That's silly," Emma declared with the straightforward logic of a child. "More people who love you doesn't make things confusing. It makes things better." Out of the mouths of babes. Later that evening, after Blaine had taken the children home to get ready for the school week, I sat in William's chair with a cup of tea and reflected on how much had changed. The house felt alive again. Where once it had been a museum of my loneliness, it was now a home filled with laughter, arguments over homework, and the comfortable chaos of family life. The guest room that I'd sadly converted from a nursery back to storage was now properly equipped for grandchildren again, with bunk beds and toy boxes and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. My relationship with Blaine had healed in ways I'd hardly dared to hope for. The guilt he'd carried for years, guilt that Nola had carefully cultivated, was finally lifting. He was remembering who he'd been before her influence, rediscovering his own judgment and his own worth. And Emma and James, my precious grandchildren who'd been strangers 6 months ago, were becoming the lights of my life. Emma with her sharp intelligence and protective instincts, James with his gentle heart and gift for finding joy in simple things. They were healing too, learning that love didn't have to come with conditions or manipulation. The phone rang, interrupting my peaceful reflections. It was Mr. Henderson. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "I have some news. Mrs. Nola Morrison has formally declined to complete any further tasks outlined in your husband's will. She's requested that I process her final inheritance payment." "The $1, I said. "The $1, he confirmed, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "She's also asked me to tell you that she considers this chapter of her life closed and doesn't wish to have any further contact with you or your family. And the children? She'll exercise her custody rights, of course, but she's indicated that she won't be fighting for additional time or trying to interfere with their relationship with you and Blaine." After I hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness thinking about second chances and the price of pride. Nola could have had a place in this family if she'd been willing to admit her mistakes and make amends. William had given her a path back, difficult, but not impossible. Her refusal to take it said everything about who she truly was, but her loss was our gain. Without her constant manipulation and interference, Blaine was becoming the father he'd always wanted to be. Emma and James were learning what healthy family relationships looked like, and I was finally able to be the grandmother I'd always longed to be. A year later, I stood in the same kitchen, but this time I wasn't alone in my dinner preparations. Emma was teaching her boyfriend how to make William's famous gravy. The recipe had become a family tradition. James, now 10 and full of opinions, was arguing with Blaine about whether we needed 1 pie or 2 for dessert. "Definitely 2, he insisted. "Emma's boyfriend eats like a horse, and Uncle Dave is coming." Uncle Dave was my brother, who'd driven up from Los Angeles for Emma's 13th birthday. Another relationship that Nola had tried to damage with lies and manipulation, but which had been beautifully restored. The house was full of voices, laughter, and the comfortable chaos of a family that had found its way back to itself. In the dining room, I could see the portrait William had commissioned for our 40th anniversary, the one Nola had always hated because it showed the 3 of us as a unit, a family that existed before she came along. The will reading felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been only 18 months. The woman who had sat in that lawyer's office, humiliated and isolated, seemed like a stranger to me now. That woman had been so focused on surviving each day that she'd forgotten how to hope for better ones. As I watched my family, my real family, the people who loved me not for what I could provide but for who I was, I felt William's presence as strongly as if he were standing beside me. He'd kept his promise. He'd made sure that truth won over lies, that love conquered manipulation, and that family meant something more than just blood and obligation. The inheritance Nola had been so desperate to claim had never really been about money. It had been about respect, about dignity, about the right to love and be loved without conditions. And in the end, I'd inherited everything that truly mattered. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.